In talking about the meaning of diversity, I mentioned that we can think about diversity in terms of characteristics that can directly influence work by influencing how group members approach a task, and that we can think about it in terms of the characteristics that influence the social dynamics of the group. The next thing you might ask is, so what? Or what does it really mean for members of the group and for the organization? What are the implications? Considering patterns of human behavior also suggests that fit will be associated with less diversity unless an organization's leaders and managers are deliberate in valuing diversity and promoting norms consistent with that. Generally, individuals prefer similarity. That may be partially because our brains get overwhelmed when there's too much to process, and it's simpler to categorize people into us and them. Similarly, it takes effort to think about the characteristics of a culture we're not familiar with, which may contribute to our tendency to use the culture that is familiar with us to determine if a behavior is normal, so to speak. The communication and process implications I mentioned earlier also make group interactions more difficult. Those difficulties can be stressful to group members, and that stress may be seen as an indication that person-organization fit is low. Collectively, then, evidence suggests that person-organization fit and diversity are negatively related. In other words, as one goes up, the other goes down. The influence on the organization will depend somewhat on what type of diversity is involved, which makes sense given what we learned about some characteristics relating more to the task and others relating more to the social dynamics. Two other related variables are the type of work and the stage in the related process. For example, the article about the new analytics of culture included research findings related to cognitive diversity. The way that diversity influenced performance varied depending on where the group was at in the project. Those findings were consistent with other studies that indicate diversity can have a negative effect on communication and group processes. Cognitive diversity appeared to increase the time it took groups to define their task, and later it appeared to make it more difficult for the group to coordinate and complete the project. Between those points, though, when the projects were in the phase that would involve idea generation, diversity positively influenced the group's success, which would fit with the other findings about problem solving. The way that diversity and fit influence the organization also depends in part on how leaders and managers approach it. One model classifies the potential approaches organizations can take as being assimilation, protection, or value. Assimilation is sort of like the melting pot idea, but in this context, it would mean that they recruit members, train, and do other practices that focus on creating shared values. In contrast, a protection approach emphasizes recruiting underrepresented groups, which increases diversity. Both of those approaches are less effective, though, than the value perspective, which emphasizes the unique contributions represented by diversity in various characteristics. The premise of the value model is consistent with the number of the characteristics of organizations that manage diversity successfully. In other words, they minimize the negative effects and maximize the positive. For example, successful organizations not only acknowledge differences, but have policies and procedures that accommodate those differences. Successful organizations also consider practices that influence informal networks as well as formal networks, which is consistent with the findings about social cliques mentioned in the new analytics of culture. The new analytics article also mentioned having shared beliefs across the organization. That relates to other findings indicating that organizations whose leaders and managers are successful at managing diversity also foster commitment to the organization. That may fit with the suggestion about common norms and beliefs in the new analytics article. At this point, you might be wondering if it'd be more efficient to try to just decrease diversity in organizations rather than increasing it. We've learned about the way fit's related to stress and the potentially negative influence of stress. Diversity also seems to come with a number of other challenges. Diversity isn't just an issue of political correctness, though. It's practical. The problem-solving benefits can outweigh the negative influences. In service jobs, a diverse workforce can help increase customer satisfaction. Across industries and outside of the business world, globalization leads to increased diversity in many types of groups. In other words, it isn't practical to manage diversity by minimizing it.